Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. I had a really just blessing happen to me yesterday. I was working at the farmer's market over here in Gilbert. At first I was a little discouraged because all my friends were at the men's breakfast and I was working. But God had a purpose for it. And so typically when we work, we do a little farmer's market on Saturdays, and we've got a couple kind of younger teenage girls and boys that sometimes work with us. And last spring, I had a brother and a sister working with us. They're from Queen Creek. And we were teaching them, they're Christians, and we were teaching them how to heal the sick. And so anytime somebody would come up to the booth that looked like they needed healing, we would pray for them, and then we would teach the kids, how to pray for them, and then watch them see what happens, or let them see what happens. And so we had a boy last spring that came up to the booth. He's probably, I'm guessing he's probably 14 or 15, and he was in a wheelchair. And we're like, oh, that's weird. What's going on with him? And so his parents weren't with him, and he came up just to buy a lemonade. And so I took one of the girls, and I said, hey, you want to go out there with me, and we'll go pray for him. We'll see what Jesus does with him. And she's like, okay. And so we were actually starting to get busy, and so we left one person in the booth, and then the girl and I went out to pray for this boy. And he was a little groggy. What we found out is he was kind of doped up on painkillers. And he had been in a climbing accident and had severely impacted his spine in like a few different areas. I don't know all the terminology, but he had been to the doctor, and they put him in a wheelchair. They said, you're not allowed to walk. We're not sure, how this is going to go, so to speak. And so he had told us that, and then we prayed for him. And honestly, I didn't share too much with him. I just told him about Jesus, and I told him that Jesus could heal his body, and I asked him if he'd give us permission to pray for him. And so I only had a few minutes because we were so busy, but we prayed for him, and then I let the girl pray for him, and then we spoke to his body, and we just commanded it to be healed. And I just told him, I said, hey, Jesus is going to touch your body right now because he wants you well. I had that confidence that Jesus wanted him well. And so after we prayed for him, we was like, check it out. Do you want to try to stand up? Do you want to get up and move around? And he's kind of telling me, I can't. The doctors won't let me, this, and that. And I said, well, did you feel anything? What's going on? And he's like, well, I feel peace. And I said, well, that's a good thing. And I said, we're going to pray for you again. And I said, you still have pain? And he's like, yeah, I still feel pain. So we prayed for him again. And he said he felt the pain start to go down. And he felt the peace of God. And he was kind of like, he was letting us pray for him, but you could tell he wasn't like super like interested, so to speak. He actually kind of like scoffed at us a little bit when we were talking about Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care if you don't believe. Like, we're going to pray for you, and he's good, and he's going to touch you. And so we were just encouraging him. It doesn't matter. Like, God's going to reveal himself to him. And so we prayed for him, and he just kind of got his lemonade, and he took his wheelchair, and he kind of walked, or he wheeled off. And we kind of watched him for a little while. I was kind of watching to see how he was doing, and then that's all we heard from him. And then a few months later, these two parents came to our lemonade stand, and they're sitting there just all teary-eyed. And they said, do you know who we are? I'm like, no, I have no idea who you are. And they're like, you prayed for our son. He was in a wheelchair a few months, you prayed for him a few months ago. He was in a wheelchair. He'd been in a climbing accident. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, I do remember him. I said, how's he doing? And he's like, well, they said, well, he's walking, and he's all better. There's nothing wrong with him. His doctor said that he's completely fine. And so they were all teary-eyed. And so, again, it was kind of hard to minister when you're working, but we told them about Jesus. I'm like, that was Jesus that touched him, right? And they're shaking their head yes, and they're crying. And I'm like, he's really good. And, and I just had just a few minutes to share with them. So all that was probably end of summer, somewhere around there, where I had met the parents, because they weren't with him the first time he was there, or if they were somewhere else. And so yesterday, which is why I was glad I was working yesterday, this boy comes up to the stand, and he orders a lemonade, and he's just staring at me, and I'm staring at him, and he's like, do you recognize me? And I kind of looked at him like, yeah, I do recognize you. I'm like, you were the one in the wheelchair. I prayed for you. And he's like, yeah. And so he goes on to tell me this long story. I wish I could have taken more time with him, but again, we got busy, and he ended up going away, but he said he'd come back. But In a real short story, he said that when I prayed for him that day, he felt the presence of God. And he said that day he realized that God was real. And what I didn't know up to this time, and this is what as he's sharing his story yesterday, he's like, I used to be on all kinds of drugs. And when you prayed for me, I was on like a lot of painkillers because of the pain. He's like, but that day you prayed for me, everything changed. And he said, I just want you to know how much this little lemonade stand has made a difference in my life. And I'm sitting there listening to him, and again, he's like 14 or 15 years old, but he's so mature. And he's just sharing his story about this radical transformation that really God did in his life, because I had very little time to share much with him at all. And but he had felt the presence of God, and his body healed. And he came back to share he had gotten off the painkillers, and he stopped doing all the drugs. And he says, he's like, now I know that God is real. And he's like, and I'm praying to him all the time now because I feel his presence. And he's like, I know that he's real. And he starts telling me all this crazy stuff that he used to believe. And he's like, I used to think I was the king of the world. And I used to think I had it all together. And I could care less about God. And I didn't even think he was real. And he's just sharing all these things. And he's like, but now I believe that he's real. And now I feel his presence. And he's like, when I pray to him, I actually feel his presence. And we were just like, Chloe had walked up, and we were just like, this is amazing. I'm like, Chloe, come listen to this. Come listen. And so I didn't have a huge amount of time to kind of like teach him or disciple him, but I just told him to come back. But for me, it was so impactful, not just that he got healed, which is amazing. That's a blessing, but just to see how God can take just a little seed. You know, I felt like all I gave him was a little seed and just a little bit of truth, and God took it and he revealed himself to him. And this kid's still on his journey. You know, I was telling him about Jesus yesterday, and he didn't know everything about what Jesus had done. But he took this little seed in this kid's heart, and he showed that he was real. And this kid, with that seed, he himself chose to get off all the drugs he was on. He himself chose to kind of renew his mind, transform his mind, you know, and he starts realizing all the stuff that was lies and all the stuff that was just garbage to him now. And I was just like, that's so powerful how God can take just the little seed and just start to do the work in the heart and just to see the fruit of it. So.